Hello, everyone. Today I am with John Woodcock, PhD, and John is a Jungian psychotherapist, a depth psychologist. He's from Sydney in Australia. I think you're the first person from Australia actually had on the Jung in the World podcast, John. So,
lovely. That's lovely, John. Yeah, so thank you very much. I appreciate it.
This is a great honour. We'll be sending you a little trophy later after. But you're based in Sydney, and we're going to talk about Catafalque today.
All right.
But I was wondering, as we just discussed, if we get on to Catafalque, if you could tell us a little bit of your own story and some of the main influences and turning points for you.
Yeah, I sure can. Yeah, it's I've had a lot of opportunities to review my own history in the course of my writings, and I've tended to review my history in the light of how the psyche has impacted my life. And so I've written several autobiographies, and each one's different from the other, which got me thinking about what the heck is autobiography anyway.
Yeah.
That's another story. But they all carry this flavor of maximizing the times when psyche had an impact on my history, you might say. So that takes me right back to childhood, where I spent a lot of time in class doodling, and they were the kind of doodles that I don't think anyone knew what to do with at all. One that occupied me for years was of a serpent wrapped around a tree. Nobody told me to do that.
That could have freaked one or two of my teachers out for a start.
Yeah. Well, mine in Queensland, they just blissfully ignored the whole thing, and it doesn't matter what he's doing. And so I was able to do it, and I did it for years. And that and a couple of other doodles just occupied my time. So right there, I can see in retrospect that psyche was beginning to impress itself upon my life.
Yeah.
But after I got out of high school into university, I did all of that seemed to recede into the background, and I buried myself in the Department of Science at the University of Queensland, and got honours in mathematics and physics, and did well until the final year, when there was one God Almighty crash. I failed everything. Boom. I was in honours physics, fourth year.
So getting A's all the time up until that point, is that what you're saying?
Up until that point, I crashed everything.
Yeah.
So that's another moment where psyche interrupted and said, well, that's the end of that. And that catastrophe swung me over into the humanities. And I finished the year out. They wouldn't let me do honours physics again, so I finished out the undergraduate work, and then I swung over to the humanities and took out a diploma in education, and became a teacher. And within 6 weeks of doing my locus, where they send you after you graduate.
Yeah.
I quit, and I set about starting up my own school. And I wrote a manifesto. The late 60s, early 70s was times of manifestos.
Yeah, well, it was a favourite word at the time, I think.
It was. And I went around the various teaching colleges in Brisbane, getting up on a soapbox in the lunchtime and just talking my manifesto. And a group of people from the Queensland University heard about me, philosophy in the philosophy department, and they at that time had been looking for somebody to become the first director of the first secondary alternative school in Queensland. So we hooked up. I settled into becoming the founding director of what was called the Orwell School.
Named after Uncle
George Orwell.
Yeah.
George Orwell, yep.
He was required reading when I was 15 or 16 at that time, I think.
All right. You're talking about Animal Farm, perhaps?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was me too. Yeah, I remember reading him there too. But the school got off the ground with me, the founding director, and I agreed to work for no salary whatsoever for the first year, just depending on the community to feed me, basically. And in my enthusiasm to get the school off the ground.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the school came to birth in Queensland, which was Joh Bjelke-Petersen country. And so that's where I ran into another crisis. At the end of the year, I was utterly exhausted, and I had developed an individualized curriculum for every student. And it was solid enough that when the Department of Education came around, they could not close the school. They had, the curriculum was solid. So what they decided to do is said simply, let's starve this cancer of any blood. It'll die off.
Probably, John, just for 1 second, probably people from overseas, they won't know much about Joh Bjelke-Petersen, but he was a phenomenon in Australia, wasn't he? Because he was almost from a different epoch, and he was a hardliner, right-winger who ran a state, but he kind of ran it as if he was running the whole of Australia. That's what he kind of thought, it seemed like sometimes, and he just didn't broach anything like alternative. It would be out of the question.
Out of the question, yeah, that's right, yeah, and he succeeded, or his minions succeeded in starving the Orwell School. We tried to raise money, but we couldn't do it. I was exhausted. I needed money so I resigned, and the school kept going for another year or so with other people taking the helm, but I was done in. And that was another major turn in my life. I left Brisbane and went to Sydney, and then joined the encounter group scene, psychodrama scene. I went deeply into psychology at that time.
What years were these, John?
These were 73 through 78, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
there was a tremendous amount of group action, wasn't there? Spiritual groups and encounter groups.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I was one of the... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it was kind of like, to me, there was the 60s, and then in the 70s, then all those groups sprang up. And they were very powerful groups, weren't they?
I was one of the founding members of a group of 6 of us who started up encounter groups in New South Wales.
Right.
We were gung-ho.
Yeah.
And we weren't earning money. I mean, I was earning money where I could, and just enough to pay for my training and put food in my mouth and so on. But that was very much of the times. And I had a ball. But it was during that time that I got another visitation from Psyche, and it was in an encounter group. This is around 76, I think, where I had a visitation in an encounter group from the other side, you might say, which took me away from the encounter group psychologically, and I entered another domain of experience where certain events happened, which I've written about, but I'll keep it a bit short here. And that that turned out to be a major turning point where I started to get conscious that I was handed a gift from the other side, and when I came back,
conscious of what though?
Conscious of the reality of the psyche.
Right. Okay.
I started to get conscious of it because I saw a gift being given to me in this other dimension of experience.
Yeah.
And when I came back to the group, nobody understood what the hell I was saying.
Yeah.
Which has been a story of my life, really.
Mm.
But nonetheless, it imprinted me, and I started to get the notion that there was another world, another reality that was equally real to the empirical world, but not reducible to it. That was the experience I had there, where I was given a gift from the other side in this other dimension. As I was lying there in the group with my eyes closed, you know.
And had you come across Jung by that stage, or?
Maybe it'd be unlikely that I hadn't, but he hadn't really registered.
Yeah.
That had to wait a couple of years when. So if we scoot forward to 78, I had this inexplicable impulse to go to the United States.
Yeah.
And so I organized it so I'd have 3 months holiday there, took along a few $1,000s, and landed in Los Angeles with a telephone number in my hand, not knowing a soul. And during the course of that 3 months, I got this extraordinary intuition that I was not going back to Australia. And that decision helped my life fall apart, because I ended up having no money, no green card, no social security number, no way to live in, and yet I decided to do it based on this intuition.
Mm.
So it was clearly a signal from the other side, and I listened.
Mm.
And that's something I have, I think, come into this life with a willingness to listen and be guided by happenings that, if you like, are located on the other side, and which are determinative. I listened and acted, and my life took such unexpected turns.
You followed them.
Yes, without knowing where the hell I was going and what I was doing, and it's really consequential to live that way.
Yeah.
I ended up in Jungian analysis. I still to this day cannot remember how I got there.
Mm.
But this was in 79, a few months after I'd arrived. And the analyst took one look at my dream material and agreed to see me for $30 an hour.
Mm.
He was aware that something was happening.
You should have negotiated for 30 Australian an hour, and then you would have done well on the exchange rate.
Yeah, right. A few years ago, I don't know what the exchange rate was, but it was an act of extraordinary generosity. And for 3 years, he just he did almost no interpretation. He just held the stream, the volcanic explosion of material that I had no idea about.
So you were just having a multitude of dreams. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, it all broke loose, which one can think it as. That's why I came to the United States, to find some people who could actually hold that material.
Yeah.
And there's no other account I can give.
Yeah.
That I was basically shown, you need to be here now, and you need to hook up with this guy now. And so for 3 years, he just held me in the process, as I told him these dreams that I had no conscious relationship to at all. That had to come later. But I wrote, I began a diary. I've got a really good record of all those dreams, and they were dreams that were laying out the future for me, you might say.
So some of them using the jargon for a second, there were some big dreams in there that really.
Yes, most of them were at that time.
Yeah.
They were beyond what my ordinary consciousness could understand. They involved imagery and symbols that I had not, particularly the serpent, as we said, that I hadn't consciously thought about before. So I had to catch up to that.
Can I just ask you, John,
Yeah.
before when we were talking, prior, you'd mentioned the serpent. So can you just speak a little bit about what is the serpent? I know I remember reading Hillman once, and he said that, whenever the snake comes in a dream, and then this is the ideas that people give with the snake, and they say this or they say this. There's about 8 or 10 of them or whatever. But
Yeah.
what is it? What is it for you? I mean, it's obviously a pretty powerful symbol, isn't it?
Oh, well, yes, it's determinative. That was the preeminent symbol that was pushing my life forward.
Mm.
Now, if a serpent appears in one's dreams or visions, which I also had, that points to the extraordinary distance, psychological distance between consciousness and the depths of the psyche, because it has to appear as a serpent.
Mm.
Now, you cannot influence a serpent.
Mm.
You can't talk to a serpent.
Mm.
You can't pat a serpent and domesticate it.
Mm.
What it does or says in dreams is determinative. You have no say. And so it's fateful. So a serpent's appearing in your unconscious life means that what is about to happen is fateful. And there's an enormous distance between that fateful movement and one's daily consciousness. I was brought up. I'll tell you another dream that just came to me. I was brought up in middle class Queensland, where my mother was a real estate agent, my father was a radiographer, and you just talk the surface of life. Weekends were boozing weekends, barbecues, and so skipping back a little bit to this other dream, which relates to the serpent, I was about 21 years old, and my parents held a 21-year-old birthday party for me. And I tell you what, the movie The Graduate could have based itself on that party I had. Have you seen The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman?
It was a long time ago, John. I can't remember.
Yeah, well, he had a birthday, and it was just an occasion for the adults to get together and get drunk. And his solution was to put on one of the gifts from the adults, which was a scuba diving, and he went to the bottom of the pool and just stayed there. Well, I had the same dissonance between what I was on about and what all the adults around me were on about, just total. And so the dream I had around that time was an extraordinary dream, which again told me about the impossibility of my task. But it was a dream where I was in the backyard of my parents' home, where there was a pool, naturally, a swimming pool. And in that pool was a gigantic sperm whale, and it was leaking sperm all over the pool. It was in the pool, as only a dream can present.
Yeah.
It was huge, but it was in this domesticated suburban pool, leaking sperm all over the place.
So it's like something huge and archaic is waking you up within this classical Queensland middle-class family or something.
Yeah, within the surface life of the 20th century.
Mm.
And that was my task. That was given me to find a way to facilitate that enormous abyssal creativity in the context of modern contemporary life that's surface only. So you can imagine the tension.
Yeah.
I mean, the tension is captured in that dream where the whale's all crunched up in the pool. Yeah, can't flow freely.
In my language, it's like you're going along and then these fateful eruptions start to occur, isn't it? And some are not, you can't just gloss over some.
No.
Like they're genuine calls or genuine calls to depth or
exactly, John. That's right. That's almost what you said is almost the definition of a spiritual emergency. If I ignore it, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't ignore it, but that and the serpent dreams that flowed when I went to the States, to get back to that time, they couldn't be ignored, and so I started to have a spiritual emergency. I broke down under the impact. I mean, I had so many visions and waking experiences of the serpent that basically named itself as Kundalini. I didn't impose that name on it. It was given to me that this is the process you're going through, or one name for the process. So given my cute little domesticated suburban consciousness, that had to be broken down. So I broke down.
Jumping ahead a little, John, as well, is that when I first started reading about shamanic ordeals or shamanic practice or whatever, that initiatory illness that they often talk about, that it's like someone's been marked out for. But I mean, that doesn't make it any easier at the time, does it? Because you don't know about all those.
No, you don't know.
You haven't read about shamans or whatever, but it's kind of like that how somehow the person was set aside from the tribe through illness or through whatever, and that's ultimately the form of deepening or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, it's in modern terms, what's undergoing the initiation is the you might call the second personality. That's what's being initiated, being initiated by psyche itself. That's the modern definition of what a shaman can be today, where the psyche is doing the initiating, and the inner being of oneself is getting initiated, going through all of that, and the waking ego is participating in it.
But some of the waking ego maybe is, I don't know, I'm just speaking from my own experience now, is holding on to the what is it? The ideals of the culture, like the middle class, the Range Rover, the dog, and 2.5 kids, and that kind of thing. It's like, it doesn't just kind of disappear in a day, does it? It's like
no. Well, if it does disappear, then you've got a psychosis on your hands. But the structure has to go. So like you, my waking ego tried to make itself the center of attention. This is happening to me in a simplistic sense, and all of that has to get broken down. And the more I held on, the more the amperage went up, and my body started glowing like a torch. And I began shedding my skin like a snake every few days from the burns that I was receiving from within. And another major serpentine symbol was that would feel a tension coiling up my spine, and then releasing, and physically, visibly, publicly, I would shake out like a watch spring unspringing, unwinding, suddenly, like, and that was publicly visible. I couldn't stop it. As well as the skin, that was all public, visible, available to other people to see. So they were the outward manifestations of this unstoppable process that I was in, where the serpent was the initiator, if you like, and I was going through it, or the serpent wisdom was the initiator, and I was going through it at a pretty deep level. That, look, I spent 20 years in Seattle. I don't think I ever went out into the forest and had a look at the beautiful state that I lived in. I was in the basement, screaming, painting, trying to do clay work, unbearable pain for years. For years it went on. And all the time I was getting these visions that the serpent power was at the bottom of it. And I had to catch up in consciousness to it.
John, I just want to ask, I've been thinking a little bit lately about, I think in Jung language, spirit of the time, spirit of the depth. And, when you were talking about the time in Sydney in the 80s and the encounter groups and the groups, to me, that was the spirit of the times, wasn't it? It was like there was this outpouring of something, a zeitgeist, an awakening of, like, an opening into something different for sure.
Yes.
But then what you're just talking about there, the serpent, it reminds me of the spirit of the depth. So what's the difference between, how would you talk about the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths?
Well, it can be talked. It can be talked in a number of ways, all my writings are on academia, and I worked across many disciplines to talk about different ways of expressing the two worlds, the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths. Now, that's Jung's formulation, and it's pretty good, a pretty good one. It's not the only one.
Yeah.
As I tried to catch up with what was happening to me throughout the decades that followed, I had recourse to a whole lot of other disciplines. For example, in the 90s, I was reconnected back up to my undergraduate years with my love for physics and mathematics, and that gave, I was interested in terms of its rhetoric, and I could re-enter those fields with some background. I actually knew some things, and so I could enter the contemporary world picture as described by physics and mathematics, but with a view to understand the spirit of the times versus the spirit of the depths in their language. So, I started using language like third dimension and the fourth dimension, which early modern art and the science of the time were deeply interested in. They called it the fourth dimension and the third dimension,
right?
And their relationship. And there was no conflict between art and science at the time. They were just fascinated by it. So that they're two cultural practices right there that talk about the spirit of the times versus the spirit of the depths in their language. But there are many others too. So I don't cleave to any one way. Philosophically, it's talked about in terms of the two worlds, and which is fine. That's fine by me. Another one is you can talk about positive reality and negative reality. But the important thing is, what does one have to do with the other?
Right.
See, and that's what Jung struggled with all his life.
So what would you say about that? What does one have to do with the other? And I'd just like to say one thing before
Sure.
you start.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is I can't remember the exact words, but I think I remember reading somewhere in Jung that, you know, sometimes the spirit of the times can begin a journey, can facilitate a journey. Perhaps it leads more towards the spirit of the depths later, but I could see that within my own life, how that kind of 60s spirit, or that spirit of the time in the 70s or the 80s, it initiates something, but the spirit of the depths is the part that comes later, if you want to put it that way, the part that the real learning.
Do you have an example there at all? Or do you have memory at all? Or?
Oh, only in the sense of, I think that 60s spirit, you know, was questioning materialism and
I think I see where you're going. Yeah.
questioning some of the basic tenets of Western society. Really, it was kind of an opening, and then they kind of brought in. There was Alan Watts, and they brought in Hinduism, and you know there was other influences, and some got onto Carl Jung and all that. So it's kind of like the spirit of the times was an opening.
Let me see. I'll run this by you. See if this resonates with you. What you're describing, I think, is something about the Jungian view of the first half of life and the second half of life. So in the first half of life, not all people do it this way, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
I unfortunately was given it the reverse, and had to learn how to value the spirit of the times later because I was drowning.
Yeah.
But in the first half of life, you know, normally we just absorb what the spirit of the times has to give us. You know, we career, profession, marriage, to stereotype it a little bit, and we just reading, we just take it all in, and around about the second half of life, we find out one way or another that while we were just undergoing the ego gratification of learning how to be how to comport ourselves adequately in life, in the spirit of the times, all the while our soul life has been doing something with that material that we had no idea about. That's why I love Antonio Machad's poem, where he talks about his failures throughout, and he said, all the while, bees were making honey of all my old failures in my heart.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. I just love that poem. I came across that poem when I was in the deepest despair, and it was honey. And so, does that resonate with you? Is
Yeah.
how you shift from the spirit of the times to the spirit of the depths, where you start to turn more directly to what the spirit of the depths is doing with the first half of my life? It was doing something completely different, and you can become aware of it. It's where we discover that our life is both a linear narrative and also a circumambulation.
Yeah.
And we come into more of the circle part later on, if you have that temperament. I think a lot of people don't. Yeah.
John, I'm just wondering how, like, if we're thinking of maybe getting on to Catafalque now, and maybe we can see if we can tie some of this in. But I remember reading Catafalque, and you know, I was thinking this morning that it was a bit like a mysterium tremendum in itself when I read that, and it was like a bit of shock or wonder all at the same time. And there's something deep, something very powerfully deep. It felt like I was wandering around for a couple of days trying to kind of, you know, digest it. And he's talking about this time, the pre-Socratic philosophers and some of what they went through. And I think what stayed in my mind is the prophecy of their practice, the initiatory, the incubation, the dreams, the mystery, yes. and that this was the beginning of Western culture. So,
yes,
I don't know. And since reading it, and then I thought, I was one of those people that went off to India, and then somehow through Catafalque and maybe the Neoplatonists later or whatever, but it's like to learn that there was a spiritual tradition that ran through Western society has somehow been incredibly important.
Yeah, it sure is, John. I think that's a great contribution that Peter made in that book, where he linked Jung pretty well directly to Parmenides, and I think he called it the golden chain. I think at least that comes up there. But when I read Catafalque, I felt a deep kinship with everything he's saying, which led me to write my response, which is up on Academia, where probably something he would hate. But anyway, I did it, and that is the top number readership of everything I've written.
Right.
I think it goes into the thousands, where most of them are around the hundreds and so on like that.
Just anecdotally, I know it's influenced quite a few people, that book. It's, quite a few people I've come across.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't so much influence as much as coming home to recognition. He's writing about something that's really resonant, because I also believe that Jung, first and foremost, was a mystic.
Yeah, which was terrible, but it was terrible. It seemed like, what do you read? Do you even read it in some Jungian literature that, Jung was no mystic or something, or, as if, but funnily enough, I've never seen it as such a bad thing to be called a mystic. I mean,
I celebrate it. Yeah, exactly, and that's what I loved about Catafalque. He zeroed in on it, and in spite of his tone of contempt to so many others, which I don't share, his zeroing in on Jung's mysticism was completely confirming to me of what I understood about Jung and about my life. That certain individuals are called to that side of things, and there's all hell to pay if you are. And I've written about Jung's experiences during the Red Book, and I've picked out aspects of the Red Book that I haven't seen anybody else really give a lot of attention to. In terms of his suffering, and I only did so because I suffered being something like a human torch for about 20 years, as the other world number two, or spirit of the depths, worked itself out on me. Which brings us to the relationship between the spirit of the depths and the spirit of the times. It seems to me that Catafalque completely valorized Jung the mystic, and made a bid for where he put it. He wrote about it very, very well. That the split that we're facing today is between the extraordinary and the ordinary, which might be another way of saying spirit of the time and spirit of the depths, and that we're in this terrible split. But the the cure. I think he made a bid for this position. The cure was they're not different. That the extraordinary and the ordinary, it's the same. That's who we once were. You know.
He was saying in the beginnings of Western culture, the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, they had dreams that influenced them. They had visions. They had prophetic dreams, and then somehow that Jung is also linked to this kind of thing. Like they were in a way like shamans, if you want to use that term, really the first philosophers, and Jung is somehow linked to that tradition because he's talking about the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. He saw in Jung that tradition, and Peter is an eloquent spokesman for that tradition, that lost foundation for our entire Western culture, and I love that. I love reading that. He gave due attention to Jung's descent into the crater. But I don't think he wanted to give too much attention to the suffering Jung underwent as the spirit of the depths and the spirit of the times started to talk to each other from within the contemporary world picture. I don't think that was his task in the book. His was more to say, look, people, if you think that Jung is anything other than a mystic, you're missing the boat. This is the kind of man he was, and Peter aligns himself with that very deeply to bring it forward, to bring that.
And maybe just as people have said before, the anima was a real conversation he was having with a woman that was put into a psychological concept, or the shadow, or the whatever, that those kind of things came later as contemporary ways of describing.
That's right. That's right. And Jung had to do that because he was very frightened that if he was labeled as a mystic or an artist, that'd be the end of it.
Yeah.
He would not be able to bring it forward into the contemporary world picture. And that's what he was on about, in my view.
He was very worried about it, wasn't he?
Oh, terrified. And I know that because I was terrified of the same thing. How do I? That's why I took out a PhD, because I was terrified if I did not make a bridge somewhere, I would become psychotic. And I got really close. I got close. It's I got to the point of suicide, and because the stakes are that high, when you've been initiated into the depths of being, and then you look at the surface, the spirit of the times, and you think, oh no, there's no relationship here. I'm done. The relationship has to be found in language first and foremost, and that's what Jung was working on.
John, I want to ask though.
Sure.
The descent and, the belly of the whale, or Persephone being abducted into the underworld. Like the underworld, it's not like going to your auntie's house and having tea and cakes, is it? It's like, there's the reality of an experience like that, which is shocking, can turn your hair grey, and it's shocking, But the idea of the death, the rebirth, like I was speaking to someone about the Renaissance lately, and that was a pretty dark time in the Renaissance too, wasn't it? It's like there was the plague, the Black Plague, and life expectancy was pretty low and all that. But it's kind of like the death and the rebirth, the Renaissance was going somehow together.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So how are they connected? In terms of the other side of the equation, you know, what is born from all of this?
Oh, okay. So that's the $60,000 question of our times.
Yeah.
If you just get on the internet for 5 minutes and look up end of the world, or and by the way, when I finished my PhD, which was on the end of the world as a crisis in consciousness, the word consciousness studies. If you look it up on the internet in 1998, 97, something like that, you had these small modems,
Yeah.
very slow. But the internet was up and running, but there was about 4 websites on consciousness studies today, and that's when I finished my PhD. Today, millions.
Yeah.
It's
like so many people have been pulled into that kind of
yes
work, haven't they?
Yes. So the point, to your point, you'll see roughly equal number of these millions at dealing with the death of the end of the world. It's said in one way or another. Climate change, in language, in philosophy, just so much rhetoric in the professions. The end of history is using the rhetoric of their profession to say the end of the world, and it's catastrophic. An equal number are talking about the birth of a new world. The promise of something to come. So they're quite equally balanced, which points to the enormous tension and the enormous uncertainty that we're all living today.
Yeah.
So as far as what's to come, that's all in the realm of possibility.
Yes. I'm wondering though, on the individual level, like, okay, within a cultural societal level, like who knows in one sense, and can we know? But I remember Hillman saying once, with Persephone, that she had to kind of, or even when he was talking about Psyche, that beauty was found, through opening the box in the underworld or whatever. That there are some, like, behind me is the Anima Mundi or whatever, or the world from the tarot. But it's kind of like,
right.
There are some things on a personal level where it seems like the destruction leads to more feelings of a sense of the world, of beauty, of.
Oh, well, exactly right. This is Jung's privileging the individual. Basically saying that anything new that's going to come is going to come through individuals first. And so the individual, spiritual emergencies are a category to sort of capture that individuals must go through this first. And the successful candidates, you might say, will come through into a rebirth. And then the task begins how to language that rebirth. And at that point, you go into the supermarket of ideas that are running around globally today, and you take your chances. There are so many voices, and which ones do you listen to? But the primary importance that Jung gives, and so do I, of helping or assisting or facilitating the individual who is pulled into this drama of the end of one world and the birth of another. They need every assistance they can get, and they're not getting it. Yeah. So a lot of people are going under. For example, the standard treatment of psychosis today is you don't listen to the content at all. You just medicate. You do not listen to the content. So in other words, you don't listen to the psyche. Well, that's going to do a lot of people in. They need individuals who are pulled into this crisis, which you can call the spirit of the depths, pushing its way into the spirit of the times. People who in that drama need a lot of knowledgeable assistance.
Yeah.
And you don't do it by ignoring the content of their visions or their dreams. You just don't. Yeah, that is. You might as well give them a knife to cut their throat.
Yeah.
That makes the stakes even higher when the individuals are getting done in by the refusal of the society in which we're born to pay any attention whatsoever to the reality of the psyche. That's what's upon us today. But those who make it can come forward with a lot of, and I've read a lot, research of people who are catapulted into the spirit of the depths. And if they're not well prepared, they come out with ideas that are just plain dangerous or wacky. And that needs to be understood.
Like what? Give us an example.
Formation of cults, for example.
Right.
The acceleration of technology, all of that was born in the realm of ideas. That's the spirit of the depths too, but it's taken over by the power principle.
Yeah.
And so what's come forward is an abomination to anything human. We're busy creating a culture that is absolutely inhuman. And we're doing that because people are getting having access to the spirit of the depths, but they haven't worked out the shadow. They haven't worked out their power problems.
Yeah.
And so they just say, oh, that's a great idea. I can make $1 million. And they just sweep it into the world.
Yeah.
Where it's greedily captured by those who are seeking who are under the claims of money, and that creates a world. So the spirit of the depths coming into the spirit of the times does create a new world and is doing so, but it's a world that I don't think we really want. Well, many of us will all begin to feel the consequences of the world that we've all complicit in co-creating through not doing the inner work of integrating the shadow and having a conscious relationship with the anima.
Yeah.
All of that, and that's who does shadow work today? And that's what Jung was saying. That's got to start there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really difficult work. But if you do it, then what comes into the world is a product of love. Now that's different. When the rebirth, you produce cultural forms that are rooted in love, and that's different.
And again, this is just kind of anecdotally, John, but you see, I come across a lot of people. It seems to me that when people do this kind of work, that they start to begin to want to write or to paint or to this or to somehow express, and again, it is maybe finding the language and the form and that, but it seems that happens with so many people, and I find that a really wonderful thing, the way that happens. And the other is this thing of the quickening or whatever. It's like, I have a friend that lives not so far away, and he could probably relate to a lot of what you've been talking about today. But we were chatting the other day, and I was saying it's like a lot of what seems to have been behind a veil for a long time, or hidden away in the invisible world, kind of working on or trying to come to terms with, or whatever, engaging with, sometimes against your will, sometimes with your will, but all of those things. But then now it seems with people that it's the rubber's meeting more of the road. It's coming more into the world,
Yes.
and there's a lot of people like that. You know, you get this sense that there's this kind of, there are a lot of people that have been hiding behind the veil, that are.
That's a beautiful image. The veil's a beautiful image. Now think about what a veil is, which has governed our culture in terms of the relationship between the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths up until a century ago, something like that. So a veil both conceals and displays. So when a woman wears a veil, for example, you get this lovely feeling that her beauty is concealed, but also it's revealed. It's implicit. You know, you get these ambiguities. With the destruction of my favorite one is the Aphrodite statue of Venus de Milo, where she's covering herself, but also you get this delicious erotic feeling that she's revealing herself at the same time. Yeah. It's a delicious, absolutely delicious paradigm of ambiguity. That's been the way we've related to the spirit of the depths for centuries, but longer, up until the time when ambiguity was destroyed, which is around the 19th century. You might philosophically, you'd say the logic of the copula has been destroyed. So there's no invisible unifying factor between inner and outer. Inner and outer have just fallen apart. Yeah, and we get materialism, and that's what we're living in now. So when the spirit of the depths seeks to come into the spirit of the times, it doesn't do it through the image of the veil. It smashes the veil. Yeah, the veil is smashed, and that is catastrophic. And that's a big source of my writings, because that produces unintelligibility, a breakdown in intelligibility. But
if we go back to your process for a while, and maybe mine as well, isn't there something where one is learned, the language has to catch up to the experience? So it's that you've got a language for these kinds of experiences you've had over many years. So you have the ability to sing your song or speak of the world or speak of these things.
In today?
Yes.
Yeah, that's taken about 30 years.
Yeah.
I had a dream of being subjected to the spirit of the depths in the form of a nuclear bomb going off next to me.
Yeah.
And my whole body heating up, and I was given the mandate from the dream, from the vision, you must stay conscious through this. And so my body began to heat up, and as the bomb went off, and I had to endure basically the transformation of matter into energy. But blood started pouring out of my mouth. So my first attempt to speak this mystery was blood speech. Yeah. And believe me, John, nobody wanted to hear what I had to say.
So we're all faced with, on whatever level, you know, of the intelligibility of reaching. But it seems to me there are so many people seeking the expression of this, trying to bring a form to the expression, you know?
Oh, yeah, contemporary art. Let's look at contemporary art. My God, it's shouting it. It's shouting the collision between the spirit of the depths and the spirit of the times. It's a collision between realities. Yeah. And it's not a veil. It's not one gracefully sliding through the other into penetration. It's collision. Yeah. And it's a collapse of language, a collapse of meaning that's happening. And that's starting to make itself felt through our sense perceptions.
John, I'm just aware, like we're going kind of a fair way over, but I'm
Yes.
wondering whether maybe we could take up another time. You know.
Oh, I'm thoroughly enjoying this, John. So anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to
Sure.
leave it for today. Thank you.